Hello, my name is Sheila and I would like to welcome you to my podcast All About You. I love to listen to podcasts and especially conversations with famous people. However, I think everyone has a story to tell. Maybe a place you have visited, a hobby you enjoy, or anything that you feel would be of interest. I want to have conversations with lots of different people and hear their stories. So if you have a story to tell, please contact me on my email allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com. Welcome to another conversation on the All About You podcast. Today I have a very, very special guest, David Richman from the USA. Now, David is an entrepreneur, an author, a public speaker, and an athlete. And his story is a story of courage, bravery, and sheer determination. It can teach us all some very important lessons. David was at a point in his life where things just had to change for him and his family. He was overweight, a smoker, and a life full of stress, and also with marital issues. And on top of this, his sister developing terminal cancer. He knew changes had to be made, so he stopped smoking, began running 5 and 10K races, took up cycling, and then he wrote a book, Circle of Lives. This is the story of the lives of 15 different people affected by cancer. David cycling 5,000 miles and the journey through the emotional chaos of cancer. So this is just the beginning of his journey, and I'm so happy to welcome David to the All About You podcast and to let him tell his unique story of how a commitment to his sister set him on the path to speaking with people whose lives are affected by cancer. David, a very, very warm welcome to the All About You podcast.
Well, thank you, Sheila. I'm very excited to be here with you. I always love talking about this kind of stuff, and I'm very excited to get into a conversation with you.
David, can I just ask, how are you now? I mean, we're going to go into your story, but, how is life at the moment?
Life is good. I really am very grateful for all the positive that's in the world. It's so easy to see the negative, and it's so easy to focus on that negative. But what we're all going through right now has just given us a chance to take a deep breath, and we've been forced to reassess what's important to us. I think like butterflies, we're gonna emerge from our transformation stronger and better, and hopefully even though it's very painful for a lot of people and there's a lot of difficulty in the world, I think we can all move forward from this. And that's where my mindset is that from negative, sometimes you need to burrow up into a hole. Sometimes you need to go off alone in the forest. Sometimes you need to sit down and cry it out with others. But if you give it some time, you usually come out on the other side stronger. So that's where my head's at right now, Sheila.
Oh, there's some good positive words there, David. So I cannot give justice to your story, so I'm going to leave you to tell the story. Let's hear what happened. I know bits of the story, but it's just amazing. So over to you, David.
Well, thanks. So what happened, Sheila, is that, as you mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, I had a lot of stresses in my life, some of them self-created and some of them from the outside. At the same time of going through very tough personal issues, my sister had told me that she was going to be entering a battle with terminal cancer. She had a husband and young kids and a big circle of friends that, really cared about her very vibrant life. And, just decided that it was time to make a change in my life. And so how do you make changes in your life? The easiest way is look in the mirror and say, what am I going to do different? And for the first time in my life, I decided to do that and really start to look at what was important to me. And what was important to me was to become healthy. I was just unhealthy physically, emotionally, psychologically. And so I did. I ventured on like one side of me, the athletic side, which hadn't existed before, kind of developed. And as you said, I started running 5Ks, 10Ks, and then I did triathlons, and I did Ironman distance triathlons, and 100K runs, and 150K runs, and just crazy stuff. And on the emotional side, where my development came from, Sheila, was from doing events that were in honor of my sister. And I noticed that when people were dealing with a trauma, especially the trauma of cancer, that they just weren't very well equipped to deal with the emotional side of things. So they could say, "Oh, I could lean on my friends to help me, with meals for my kids. And I want to, they could learn how to navigate work, insurance. Where do I get the best help? All of these things. But the emotional side of it, they weren't able to really focus on. They weren't equipped to have conversations with others about the emotional side of the trauma." And especially around cancer, it's a very, very difficult thing for people to wrap their brains around. I mean, what do you say when your friend says, "Oh, my daughter-in-law just got cancer"? What do you say when your coworker says, I need time off. My son just got cancer, or my father just died. I mean, we're just not well equipped to know what to do with that. And so it's a long answer, Sheila, but basically what I decided to do was to find super compelling people that had very, very, very impactful, evocative, inspiring stories about overcoming difficulties in their own lives, and then how, when they encountered cancer, how they were able to process the emotional side of it in relation to all the other things that had happened in their lives. And I thought by bringing their stories together, that it might help people, would help me, would help you, would help anybody understand what people might be going through, so that we can better engage in difficult conversations over this emotional side of things. So that's basically the whole story.
I mean, that's the interesting thing, as you said, when we hear that somebody's family member or they are involved in cancer themselves, or a family member, we don't know what to say. Do we sympathize? Will we say, "You'll get through it"? I mean, what do we say?
Yeah, yeah. When I was one of the book participants, his name is Bobby. His story is first in the book, and he was telling me a story about his dad. And his dad had a childhood friend that they spoke nearly every day. So we're talking about for decades and decades and decades. Very, very close friend. Spent their whole lives together. And the friend's wife got cancer, eventually died from cancer. And after she passed, Bobby, like a week later, called up his dad and said, "So how is so and so doing?" And he says, "I don't know." And he says, "Well, how come you don't know?" And he says, "Well, I haven't called him." And he goes, "How come you haven't called him?" He goes, "I don't know what to say to him. And I've known him for 50 years, and I don't know what to say to him." And Bobby goes, "Well, just call him up. Ask him about the weather. Ask him about sports. Ask him what he's having for dinner. He's your best friend. He just lost his wife. Anything. Say anything." But he didn't even know what to say because he was so worried that he might say the wrong thing. And so how do you go from not having the bravery or the safety to call somebody, to knowing that whatever you do, you're going to engage in a deep conversation? That's a very big difference between engaging in a deep conversation and being afraid to call, right? And so I'm trying to bridge that gap.
That is so interesting because, as you say, we don't know what to say when we're talking to somebody else. We don't want to say the wrong thing. We want to say the right thing. We have no idea what we want to say, what we want to express. We don't want to make the other person feel worse. We want to make them feel better. I mean, it's as almost, can we all be given a manual? Say this, don't say that. I mean, I know that's putting it very black and white, but I think sometimes we would like to have something like that. So, because you want to reach out, whether it's the person with cancer themselves or a family member that's affected, we just don't know what to say.
Yeah, and there's a wide range. And I I've been thinking about this idea of being more heart-centered and listening better, and really trying to be present in the moment. And that gives you a little bit more, but it's still difficult. I know when I get engaged in a lot of difficult conversations with my sister before she died, I know that I used to beat myself up because I would say to her, just automatically, you pick up the phone and say hello, and it's somebody that you don't know. Hey, how's it going? And I would all of a sudden I would just go, oh, she's dying of cancer. What do you mean, how's it going? What a stupid question, right? And one time I said to her, I said, hey, how you doing? And she said, fine. And I went, oh my God, I did it again. I asked you how you're doing, and you're not doing well. She goes, no, I'm fine. I'm doing fine. Yeah. Okay. Yes, of course I'm dying, and I'm not going to be fine at some point, but I'm all right. You can ask me the question, right? That's that's becoming like safe to say, okay, I can say something stupid. Maybe asking them how they're doing isn't a stupid question. Now, go to the extreme when you're talking to somebody who's dealing with a very difficult situation, and you cut your finger cutting a tomato, you don't call them up and go, oh, I know what you're going through, I just cut my finger with a knife. I mean, there is a wide range of things that you can and can't say for sure. Most of the time, the person that you're wanting to talk to is just as uncomfortable and not knowing what to say as you are, right? They don't want to make you feel guilty. They don't want to make it about them. They don't want to make you self-conscious. They feel embarrassed. They don't want to be weak. They don't want to sound pitiful. They don't want your sympathy. I mean, there's a million reasons that they might be going through things. Maybe perhaps they're afraid if they start to talk to you, Sheila, that you might shun them, and maybe that reminds them of being lonely as a child, and they don't want to do that. Yeah. Right? And maybe they just don't have a safe space to talk to you because of what's in their head, not because you're going to say the wrong thing.
Yeah. And they probably are just yearning for a normal conversation. What have you been doing at the morning? What are you having for lunch? What's on in your diary for tomorrow? They probably are craving normality just so that they can get away from what they're going through and say, okay, well, life is still going on for other people. You've got to go to work, your family commitments. And for them, they probably want normality, and the fact that you've been having the normal conversation with how's things going for decades, you can't decide all of a sudden that I can't ask that question anymore. It's almost like an automatic reflex.
Yep. And about your comment about wanting to move on and just live your life, there's another story that was kind of fascinating to me in the book when he told it to me. Is a really tragic story about somebody who lost his newly married. He was newly married, and he lost his wife to breast cancer. And they were able to process every single side, every aspect, every facet of her impending death. They were very open and talked about everything. In fact, she joked with him, I'm going to be pissed off at the next woman that finds you because I've made you so much better, right? They're going to get the best version of you. And they had processed it right fully. Now, granted, not easy, right? He certainly was, really, really sad afterward, and was not easy, but he had gotten through a lot of that really difficult stuff because he was able to talk to her about it. So she passes away, and everybody he runs into gives him puppy dog eyes, like, oh, how are you doing? And oh my gosh, and I'm so sorry. And he was long past that, right? He was looking at, where am I going to go? How am I going to live my life? He literally, Sheila, had to get on a plane every couple of weeks and fly, 3,000 K away, 3K away, 2,000 miles across the country just to immerse himself around people that didn't know that he had just lost his wife, because he didn't want that attention anymore. He wanted to go about picking up the pieces and moving forward. But around his people, his people, his friends and his family and his coworkers and clients, he couldn't, because they all they did was sympathize and puppy dog eye him, and he didn't want that anymore.
I mean, that's an incredible story, how that family worked it through together. So in theory, they put, the whole family in a good place. They were well prepared, and
Mm-hmm.
that is just amazing. But I can certainly understand how, although he was still grieving, and grieving has got many layers of emotion. Yeah, the fact that he said, I cannot cope with this. I've got to get away and just be normal. Life is going to go on. Things are going to change. And that's what he had to do. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Now, the reason that that part of the story was so important, well, there's two parts of his story that were so important. One was I tried to show how it was okay that he found love after losing the love of his life. And I think that that's important because some people feel guilty about that subject. Some people kind of don't understand it, but it's so brave, and it's such a wonderful, wonderful story of how do you find love after the love of your life passes away, right? Part of that, the reason that he was able to do that was because he had processed so much with his wife, because they had talked so much about everything, and because she made him commit to go into counseling after she died so that he could learn how to deal with his emotions. I mean, it was a very healthy way, and most people don't do that. Most people, Sheila, they don't talk about these things. They don't know how to talk about these things. They don't feel safe to, and they don't have the tools or the guidance with which to do this. And I thought it was important to bring this story because how do you move on from losing a spouse and finding love again? Well, one of the ways you do it is through endless and proper communication, right? And having deep, meaningful, heart-centered, real conversations, and developing the tools that will help you get through these really unimaginably difficult, stressful, emotional times. And not very many people take the time to do that, or have the wherewithal, or just the awareness that they should do that.
That story is just incredible. The fact they were so honest with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And his wife said, I know I'm going to leave, but I don't want you to live a life without somebody in your life. We all want to be with somebody in one sort of form or another. And the fact that they talked it through, she gave him her blessing, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully he went on and did find that special someone. I mean, that is just amazing.
It's amazing, and it's really it really does teach you that at whatever cost, if you have the opportunity, at whatever cost, please talk about these issues with the people that care about you, and talk about it in a meaningful way, not oh, I'm sorry, oh, I know it's difficult, which is fine if you don't know, but that's not the way to talk about it. Now, I'll give you the opposite end of the spectrum on that. So what I did, and just a little background, is I said I want to bring these 15 stories together and connect them all together. And what better way to connect them than to jump on my bike and do a solo bike ride across the country and meet them. And for people that don't know the United States, I basically went south along the West Coast all the way across south, zigzagging my way from California to Florida, which is the entirety of the United States. And then I went north and headed up the coast to New York. So I put in just under 5,000 miles. What's that, like 8K or something? So that's a lot of biking. When I was in about a week and a half in, a friend of mine had joined me for a day or two, and he said, "Hey, I want you to meet my family. They want to take you out for brunch, and thank you for doing what you're doing." And I went, "Oh, that's great." So we go out for brunch, Sheila, and his dad is like late 70s, early 80s, pulls me aside and he says, "Hey, this whole thing you're doing, this book, the writing of emotions and teaching people how to talk is such a good thing." He goes, we need to use this, and he points to his head, and we need to use this, and he points to his heart. He says, because it's so important. And I went, wow, somebody that gets it. And he told me about how he had, dealt with leukemia, and he had a cancer situation, and he's fine now, and this was many years ago, and blah, 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 blah. His daughter, my friend's sister, before the brunch, pulls me over, and she says, "Oh my God, my brother told me about what you're doing. I'm so excited. It's so important. People need to know about the emotional side. They need to know how to talk. And I had stage 3 breast cancer, double mastectomy. I used to be a nurse. Now I lobby for patient rights. And what you're doing is so important. It's so great. People they need to talk about the emotional side. So we have this brunch, and I'm super excited. And at the end, I go, hey, listen, you guys are the anomaly, right? Most people don't talk about it. And I look at the dad and I go, for you to be brave enough to talk about your situation with your daughter, and he all of a sudden his hands go in his lap and he puts his head down, and I go, And I look at the daughter and I go, well, for you to be brave enough to talk about your dad, about what you went through, and be able to, on the emotional side, connect. And all of a sudden she does the same thing. And I look at him and I go, what, you guys haven't talked? And they go, no, we haven't talked about it. We just think it's a good idea that you're teaching people to talk about it. And I go, but you both just told me. And the dad was like, yeah, but I didn't want to burden my daughter and my family. I'm kind of old school Mexican. I'm the man, and I don't show weakness, and I don't want to make them feel guilty. And then the daughter, she goes, I didn't want to bring up his past and make him feel bad about it. And then how do I deal with the fact that he might lose a daughter? Like I feel guilty about that. And I haven't talked about it with him. I said, this is exactly why I'm writing this book. Exactly. Because as close as you guys are, and as much as you want to thank me for doing this, you both have never done it. You've never talked to each other about these things. And they said, yeah, it's too hard. We don't know how. And I said, well,
that was the point then where you knew, yes, it definitely had to be a book to help other people.
Yes, because everybody that I ran into, Sheila, barring the occasional person who, like the story I told previously of Bobby, barring that very rare occasional person who talked through it, most people, almost everybody I ran into said, oh my gosh, I don't know I don't know what to do. We were in Texas, and my wife went down to grab some food and from the lobby of the hotel, and she came back up, and I said, boy, you're gone a long time. She said, oh, I was waiting in line to get some food, and a woman was there, and we just struck up a conversation, and I told her about your book, and she said, oh my God. She goes, a coworker's 4-year-old son just got cancer. I don't know what to say to her. I can't wait for the book because I don't know what to say. Now, I don't know if my book will teach everybody what to say in all situations, but what it will do is it will give you 15 very diverse, very remarkable stories of how the trauma of what people have gone through affects their cancer journey, so that we can be maybe inside of their head a little bit. And once we're inside of their head, we can maybe relate it to our own situation. One of the greatest reviews that I got early on, Sheila, was I got a note from a critical care nurse. I've been a critical care nurse for 15 years. It's going to make me a better caregiver. Wow, that's really cool, because she said, I always thought I knew what my patients were going through. I never really knew what they were going through. I thought I knew.
I mean, that is interesting that it's from a critical care nurse who is used to dealing with trauma, emotion, life, death, etc. And she is saying, this is what we need.
Yeah. And one of the stories is a very prolific, well-known oncologist, very prestigious cancer center in New York. And I spoke to her. She had been an oncologist for about 40 years. And when I spoke to her, Sheila, I said, hey, I got to ask you questions that you've never talked to anybody about. And the long story answer she gave her, the short story to the long answer she gave me was, I'm talking to you because I've never talked to one other person about the emotional issues that I've gone through in the last 40 years. And I went, wow, that is so important, because I will absolutely guarantee you cannot read her story without looking at your physician different again, going, you know what, maybe I should be concerned about what they're going through as well. Because if I can be a better patient, maybe that's going to make my doctor-patient experience a little bit better. And so what I tried to do with the book is not just bring stories of people that passed away, or survivors, or the loved ones, but also caregivers. I have a chief medical officer, so somebody from the corporate side of this. and how they process the emotions of it, and just people that got cancer when they were young or witnessed it when they were young, got it when they were old or witnessed it when they were old, just all different facets of it, all a wide range of emotion. Even, Sheila, if you can believe this, one person who smiled when they heard they had terminal cancer. Smiled. Could you imagine that? And so I think it's important to know that we don't know what people are going through, and people that we care about and people that we are in our lives and are purposefully in our lives, we should develop a better sense of understanding that we don't know what they have gone through, what they are going through. And it's best to reach out, and it's best to try to understand them. And it's best to not bring our own insecurities and our own conclusions to the conversation. There hasn't been one person that I've said, could you imagine somebody smiling when they heard they had brain cancer? And there's not a single person that goes, oh yeah, I can understand that. Because you cannot understand it. And if I give you the backstory, you would understand. But then you'd go, oh my gosh, that makes sense why she smiled at hearing those words, you have brain cancer and you have to go in for emergency surgery. And she smiled. And when you hear the backstory, you'll go, oh my gosh, that makes sense. And it makes sense because when you now understand what she was going through and what she had gone through, and to the point to where she was when she heard that diagnosis, you can now say, oh my gosh, I understand why that was, although a very negative thing, why at that moment it made her feel so good. It still gives me chills thinking about it, right?
This is all about everyone being honest, everyone laying their cards on the table, whether it is the person with cancer, the caregivers, the family, the co-workers, etc. Everybody is being totally honest. And when everyone is honest, you can then work through it together.
Mm-hmm.
But all the time, people are not being honest about how they feel, talking about the different levels of emotion. Until that happens, nobody can move forward and be encouraging, supportive, talking, and just being totally, totally honest.
Yeah. And if you're going to go to the cafe to buy a cup of coffee, and the person that's helping you says, "Hey, how are you doing today?" You don't then unload everything on them because that's not the right time. But when your friend calls you up, or your child, or your parent, or your coworker, or a friend of a friend you run into, and they look at you and they say, how are you? Or, oh my gosh, what's going on? That's an opportunity to talk, right? That's an opportunity to bridge that gap. And, I believe, Sheila, that where the true beauty of life lies is, I just believe this to my core, in meaningful connection. I just think that's where the true beauty of life is in meaningful connections. And we're only connected, humans are only really connected by one thing, and that's emotions. We really are only connected by emotions, right? If I say to you, you're in a dark cave and a big grizzly bear senses you and is coming to run after you, you understand what fear is. We're connected by that. There's not a single person alive in any language in any time in history that wouldn't be fearful. Okay? There isn't a single person alive that wouldn't understand the joy felt by a woman holding her baby for the first time, right? That the thing that connects us is emotion, and that's where the beauty of life is in understanding that and exploring that connection. And so for me, this book was wonderful because it allowed me to talk to these people for a few years and get super, super deep into the emotional side and really, really connect with them, and hopefully, bringing their stories to everybody, really touches people in a special way and allows them to then go connect to people in their lives,
I think it's very interesting when you were talking about when you went for the brunch and there was the father and the daughter, and they both basically said, we can't talk to each other about this.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just talking about the fact sometimes we need to talk to a complete stranger who is not emotionally connected, i.e., the father and the daughter, to actually feel, okay, I can tell this person everything. I can be totally honest. I can, say whatever I want to say because I've got no emotional connection with this
Yep.
person. I'm not going to hurt anybody's feeling. I'm not going to say the wrong thing. I'm not going to upset them because it is somebody who is not emotionally connected.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sheila, because there wasn't one person that I spoke to that at some point didn't say to me, I'm going to tell you something I've really never told anybody, right? That's hard for us to do with people that we're emotionally connected to if we don't have a safe space, right? And it's hard to be 100% safe because when you're super intimate and you're super open and there's a give and take, it's difficult to be safe. But like you said, it can be easier to be safe because that you don't have that emotional connection with a stranger. But I think we all yearn for that emotional connection. And so how can I be closer to my friends, to my family, to my husband, to my wife, to my kids? I just have firmly believed it. My kids will laugh. My wife laughs. I always say this all the time. More communication is better than less. What's the solution to the problem? Talk about it. More communication is always better than less. But you know what? Less communication is what we're all kind of used to, right? So,
And I think the thing as well that whether you spoke to the cancer, the people that had the cancer, whether it was their carers, family members, you were all working together to make this process easier for the next person. That their
absolutely.
experiences you are putting down in a book so that that book can help some other family to go through this. So it's almost like I don't want to use the word handbook because I don't think that's given it justice. But
Right.
you are creating, let's say, a manual with the people with this experience to help people in the future. It's a manual, isn't it, to help them through this experience?
It really is. And I think in the way that it is, right, it's a story based book. So each one of the 15 stories is brought first person as if the person the story is about has written it. I'm not in that story, even though I interviewed them, right? It's their story. I'm not in it. And I think that we all can identify with stories, right? Humans love stories. And one of the things I love about the book is when I have a friend or somebody reads it and I can engage in a conversation, is my first question is always like, oh, which story was your favorite? And all of the stories are different. Everybody gives, oh, I love this one, or I like that one, or oh, this one was really tough for me, or that one was the one that really hit home. And so I feel like in one sense mission accomplished because what might touch you, Sheila, might be different than what might touch, your neighbor. And your neighbor might think, one story was really spoke to them, where you think a different story spoke to you. And that's what my hope is. Each story is pretty easy to read in that it's not like one continuous, 300-page book and you got to remember the storyline or whatever. You could pick it up, read the story of one person in 20 or 25 pages, let that ponder, pick the book up again and read the next one. So even though the stories are a little heavy sometimes, they're mostly inspiring, mostly positive, but definitely I feel like you leave each story with a better understanding of what people might be going through, and that's important. If I understand you just a little bit more, Sheila, if I understand just a little bit more of what you might be going through, it might allow me the safety to ask you questions or to make comments that maybe connect us a little bit deeper on an emotional level.
One question for you, David.
Mhm.
Writing this book, having these conversations, cycling 5,000 miles, your physical health, your mental health, how did you cope with this?
Well, the physical part was pretty tough because I had to put in what would have been about 160K, so about 110, 112 miles every day for 41 out of 45 days, and on a big heavy steel bike into the wind. mostly I had support along the way, but on the bike during the day, I was solo, right? And I had 12, 14, 16-hour days of biking. So physically, it was really, really difficult because I had a schedule to keep, and I had to get from point A to point B every day, and I had to get there. So a lot of lessons to be learned on relying on others and also being self-reliant. So physically, it was really difficult, but I like that challenge a little bit. Intellectually, I liked it because it allowed me, when you're biking for 10 hours or 12 hours, you can think about a lot of things. And so intellectually, it really helped me formulate my thoughts on these stories and come up with a structure for the book and kind of how's it going to work. Really start to pre-write the stories in my head. But emotionally, that was a little difficult, the emotional side of it, because when you're raw physically, when you're raw intellectually, you're a little more sensitive to the emotions of it. And so I was processing the emotions around my sister's death. I was processing the emotions of people sending me stories along the way, meeting people along the way, and at times it was heavy, at times it was light, but still emotionally it was a journey. It was definitely a journey, and I'm super grateful that I was able to do it, because how often do, I don't know you, but me in my world, we don't take 6 weeks off to go bike around the country and think about life, right? We just don't do that. So I feel really grateful that I was able to do that. And out of that came so many great stories of the wonderful people that I met along the way. And I think, again, I hope it doesn't sound trite, but I like this concept of connecting. And the bike ride was the thread that connects all the stories. It's just a form of connection.
Your emotions must have been on such a roller coaster, because I'm sure, as you say, some of the stories were positive and uplifting, some of the stories were probably very dark and extremely emotional. I mean,
Mhm.
how did you cope? How did you process that? Having so much time on your own to think, as you say, on the bike.
Yeah. So I think on the positive stories, that's easy to process, because who doesn't want to feel good emotionally. The difficult stories, and some of them are really difficult. I mean, one participant who walked in on his mom killing herself when he was a little kid. I had another story, a guy who had become a close friend of mine through this process, and he had beat cancer twice, and he was just given a third diagnosis, which was absolutely going to be terminal. I had talked to somebody who had recently lost their spouse to cancer. I mean, there was some really heavy, heavy stuff. But I also was grateful, and I felt grateful for it, because had they not trusted me and had they not allowed me to connect with them, I wouldn't have known these things. And at least they found a safe place to talk to somebody. At least they knew that somebody who was inconsequential in the overall scheme of things in their lives cared. So although it was difficult, I really felt a sense of gratitude that people would talk to me and share these things with me that were so private and so emotional and so evocative and so raw and real, with the hopes that I could bring that story to others, that it might help them. That's a very fulfilling emotional journey, very fulfilling. So even though difficult, I feel like it was a blessing, a pleasure,
And the thing as well, David, you were going through the process after losing your sister.
Mm-hmm.
So you were all really part of the same group of people
Yeah.
going through the same thing, but you were documenting their stories, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you were sharing your own story.
Yeah. And look, what's strange is that we all kind of don't think our story is important. We all think like, oh, yeah, everybody I talk to, oh, why do you want to talk about my story? It's not so interesting because that's just the story that we live. And our lives are our stories that we're living. We're not watching it as a movie. There's nothing special or unique about it. It's just us. And so I still find myself thinking, well, yeah, I did have to process the emotions about my sister and about, being alone in the world and all of these other things. But you know what? Really, it's nothing compared to what other people have gone through, right? We all kind of want to discount that. And I think it's a fair thing to say. Somebody's always got it better than us in the room, and somebody always has it worse. I mean, and it is what it is. So, if you don't make, a mountain out of a molehill, then if you don't make such a big deal out of something little, then it's okay to make a big deal out of something big. And I don't care if it was a year ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago. I ran into one guy on the bike. Sheila, this was crazy. Early on, I ran into a guy and he stopped me. We were at a swimming hole. We went to go to see this swimming hole. And there was only one other person there. And he said, oh, what are you doing here? And we told him, and I said, I was on this bike ride. And I said, what are you doing? And he reached into his pocket and he grabbed a coin. And he says, I'm a pastor who happens to be a magician. And I went, wow, I've never heard of a magician pastor, but okay. And he says, you know where I'm going with this coin? And I said, where? And he said, I've been estranged from my brother for 35 years, and he's passed away many, many years ago. And I feel it's time to make amends. So I'm driving to California and from Oklahoma to put this coin on his gravestone as a way to mend that fence. And I went, whoa, 35 years estranged, and he's finally dealing with this issue long after his brother's dead, and he feels good about it. And I went, everybody's going through something. And it doesn't matter if it was a year ago or 10 years ago or 35 years ago, right? It's important. And if you can come to terms with it, and if you can learn how to deal with it, how just amazing and inspiring is that? So it was a great reminder and a great story to me that it doesn't matter when you deal with it. It doesn't matter how big it is at the moment. When, at some point, it's okay to deal with it. And my life was enriched because he had the safety and the guts and felt the comfort to be able to tell a perfect stranger such an intimate and wonderful thought. And he doesn't know that being carried forward to me, now several years later or a few years later. But how wonderful is that? And I would have never, ever have gotten that opportunity to hear that wonderful story if a stranger hadn't stopped talking to me and vice versa.
This for me is one of the reasons why I started this podcast. Everybody has a story. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter whether it's a hobby, it's somewhere you've been traveling, a job. Everybody's got a story. And when I started doing this podcast, I was really excited. Now, when I've done, I don't know how many podcasts I've done, 15, 16, I absolutely love it because the stories are so random. And to me, it's the randomness, if that's even a word, is the beauty. Everybody has got a story.
Yeah,
and your story of the magician pastor, I think, and that's the story of hope. 35 years until he felt in a place to address the issues between him and his brother. There is no time limit. There is no due date. There is no use by date. Absolutely.
Right. And on an emotional level, he needed that. He needed to connect with his brother. And I just find those kind of things just so amazing because, again, with my belief that we're all connected with this one thing, the emotional side. For when I hear that people deal with the emotional side and they feel safe to deal with it and they can come to terms with things that are often unexplainable or that are often unfathomable, that we could come to terms with such things, to be able to come to terms with them is just, it really is fulfilling. It's just fulfilling. When you can mend a fence, when you can fix a problem, when you can connect with somebody, even if it's just with your child self, if you can connect with them and heal and move forward and have a meaningful, heart-centered conversation, interaction, connection with other people, I just feel those are the moments in life that matter.
So, David, you did the journey, you kept the promise to your sister, you met the people, you listened, you talked, you wrote the story. Do you feel proud of what you've done? If your sister was here, what would she say to you?
Yeah, I think she'd be proud for sure. Am I proud? Yeah, I'm proud. Look, it's hard, because it's self-serving, right? When you bake a cake and you say to somebody, do you like the cake? Well, yeah, I made the cake because I hoped you like it, but I don't want to, there's a little guilt there, right? It's not about me, it's about the cake. So, yes, I am proud of what I've done. I think the stories are really good. I know that they are emotional stories, inspiring. They're very touching, and I think I brought the right light to a lot of these stories, that I can be proud of them. And I think my sister would be proud, and I'm more grateful than I am proud, but I do feel really good about the whole thing.
I have to say, David, I'm feeling very, very emotional.
Aww.
I'm so glad that you do feel proud, because listening to your story, and you've touched on some of the stories of people in the book, it's just incredible. I mean, you reached out to me, and I am just so thankful you have reached out to me. It's an incredible story. So while I go and get a tissue, David, can you tell people where they can find out more about you? And I mean,
Sure.
I know they can get the book on Amazon. I've checked the UK site, and it's absolutely there. So, David, where can people get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, thank you, Sheila. And sorry to make you bust out the Kleenex, or the tissues, but what the heck? Look at us, thousands of miles away, and we're connected. So the book is available anywhere books are sold. Amazon is where most books are sold, so go to Amazon. The good thing about buying the book is not only is it hopefully going to be a good read, but 100% of the proceeds go to support the cancer-focused organizations that each one of the participants chose. So my wife and I decided that we're going to put 100% of what comes to me to those organizations. So not only do you get the book, but you also know that it's going to support great organizations like the American Cancer Society and different cancer hospitals around the country and that type of stuff. So yeah, they can do that. You can buy a book on my website. It's just cycleoflives.org, which will make sense to some people and others. I don't know if that's an address that internationally people can use or not. But
I'll put all your contact details online. Yeah.
And they can always reach out to me, and I can send them an ebook. I'd be happy to send anybody an ebook that wants one. And if you want a signed copy, just go to my website, and I'll be happy to send a signed copy.
David, I mean, thank you so much for
You're welcome.
to me. And what's next for you, David? Do you have any plans for another bike ride or another challenge? Or
I think I'll leave those 5,000-mile bike rides in the past for now. I'm actually working on a couple of different fiction books, and really immersing myself in promoting Cycle of Lives, because I think it can really make an impact. And so I'm focusing on that, increasing readership, and hopefully touching people with these stories the way I've been touched with them. And then more books in the works for sure.
Oh, well, David, thank you so much. It's been an emotional journey, I have to say, for me, listening to the stories and talking to you. And I know your sister would be so proud. I know she would. I mean, you have just touched so many lives, and I know everybody's going to enjoy this podcast. So, David, thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you, Sheila. I totally enjoyed myself.
I hope you have enjoyed the conversation. Don't forget, if you have a story you would like to tell, please get in touch. My email address is allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com, and thank you for listening.